They do deserve the documents, and that's why I'm glad that Chairman Grassley took the bold step to provide this historic release. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chair Grassley.
I guess there's nothing that demonstrates that a picture is worth 1,000 words, what you see here. Obviously, our committee's responsibility is to evaluate Judge Kavanaugh's nomination and his record. As we do with every Supreme Court nominee, we're not going to do anything less in the case of Kavanaugh, and that is to have a fair and thorough process. And I think that I can say, as you can see demonstrated here by the material that's going to be available for this Supreme Court nominee, it's probably the deepest dive we've had into the background of a Supreme Court justice, at least from the quantity of the material available of any previous Supreme Court nominee. Roughly 1 million pages already or in the process of being made available. If you look at 5 times the more material than received of a single nominee, and one of my researchers said that maybe compared to the last 5 Supreme Court nominees, it would be more than all of them added together. And this, by the way, these boxes here do not contain any of the information of the 300 or more cases that the president or that Judge Kavanaugh has had serving on the D.C. Circuit. The committee is already reviewing more than 8,500 pages of cases that he participated in, and it also doesn't include the material that came with Judge Kavanaugh's questionnaire. So I hope we can see just from the questionnaire, and the questionnaire was developed by both Republicans and Democrats. It's the most in-depth questionnaire ever required of a nominee. It totals approximately 17,500 pages, all of which are publicly available. And I'm sure the staffs of both Republican and Democrat senators, as well as individual senators, are already going to work on those pages and those cases. But somehow the minority leader thinks that this is not good enough. But the truth is, he and many on his side have already voiced their opposition to the nominee, as Senator Tillis has already pointed out over here. So I question the sincerity of demands for more documents. In other words, what more do they need to know to vote no? While they continue to throw every argument against Kavanaugh at the wall and make unreasonable demands, we will work hard reviewing all this material, all of his record as a lawyer and as a judge. And I hope that they will decide to put away their election season talking points and join us in this effort to get a qualified person on the Supreme Court.
Senator Hatch?
Yeah, when you look at Judge Kavanaugh, if you want a choir boy to be on the court, in other words, from a reputation standpoint, he's it. He's a very fine person. He's lived a very fine life. He's got all the legal credentials you'd ever want in a Supreme Court justice. He's not offended anybody as far as I can see. It's just amazing to me that they make such a farce out of this. And that's something we've gotten used to and we're going to have to put up with. But the fact of the matter is that Judge Kavanaugh is going to sit on the United States Supreme Court when we're through. And I would hope that our colleagues on the other side, those who are currently opposed, without having even heard him, I'm hopeful that they'll be fair. And if they will be, in the end, they'll all vote for Judge Kavanaugh and vote for him to be a member of the Supreme Court. My colleagues understand this. I think my colleagues on both sides of the floor understand this. And This is a man who's been very well examined for these positions. He's already sitting on the second most powerful court in the land, and if anybody deserves to be on the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh certainly does. And I just want to compliment Senator Grassley and the other members of this committee for being as strongly behind him as they are. And I want to really compliment the Democrats who have stood up and are willing to stand up for Judge Kavanaugh, because they realize that we can't keep going down this partisan, picky, stupid, dumbass role that has happened around here for so long. I'm sick and tired of it, to be honest with you. I'm tired of the partisanship, and frankly, we didn't treat them, their candidates for these positions the way they're treating ours. And I would like to see us hopefully break through and change that attitude with regard to Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation. I'm grateful to stand here with my colleagues. These are good people. They know what's going on, and some are really great lawyers as well. So I just hope that we can get through this and do it in a way that will be uplifting to the country and not the mess that we've been in some of the other nominations.
Senator Lee.
I'm excited for this confirmation process, which is going to be the most transparent in history. If you stacked these documents end to end, they'd be taller than Big Ben. If you laid them out end to end flat, they would extend 11.9 Kavanaughical miles out into the distance. And that itself is significant. As a lawyer who spent time in a firm reviewing documents like these in connection with large litigation, I can tell you that even 100,000 documents can take an enormous amount of time just to review. This many documents, which we know will be produced, takes an incredibly enormous amount of time to review. This on top of the fact that this is a judge who has now served on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit for 12 years. We've got some 300 published opinions of his. We've got law review articles. We've got speeches. We have all the material in addition to all of this that was reviewed in 2006 when he was reviewed for his confirmation for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. This is more than enough for this individual. Now, some will say that he's commented on the fact that he had some very significant and formative experiences while serving as White House staff secretary. That's absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that the documents, every document that came through the White House staff secretary's office while he was there was somehow relevant to this, or that it would reveal some sort of relevance to his legal analysis. That's the job of the White House counsel, not the White House staff secretary. Moreover, it's important to remember that these documents are at the core of the executive privilege. And if there is to be anything left of the executive privilege, I say this as someone who is a strong believer in Article 1 and in the need for Congress to assert its own authority. But we nonetheless have to respect and deal with the fact that we have three coordinate branches of government. If there's going to be anything left of the executive privilege at all, those documents are at the very core of that privilege. So why then request 10 times this many documents rather than just these? Perhaps the best argument I can think of is that it might delay the process, would inevitably delay the process a lot. And it would delay the process at the request of a lot of people who have said they're not going to vote for him anyway, who have said that any effort to try to confirm him would itself be an evil effort. So what other purpose can there be other than that? It's significant that the Solicitor General papers of Justice Kagan were not produced because of executive privilege related issues. So too, we have an executive privilege related issue here, and that's one we should respect. At the end of the day, Judge Kavanaugh is going to be confirmed, and we're going to do this the right way. We're not taking shortcuts, far from it. This will be many times the document production we've had in connection with any previously nominated member of the U.S. Supreme Court. Thank you.
Senator Cornyn.
Well, you might call this the great paper chase. The irony is these documents were not even requested, by and large, when Judge Kavanaugh was confirmed to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, a court that many of us have called the second most important court in the nation. So if they were important documents to review, you have to ask the question, why didn't they even ask for them in 2006? But the plain fact is, as you heard from my colleagues, is for some of our Democratic colleagues, there will never be enough paper. You will never be able to produce enough to satisfy them. That's because 5 of them made up their mind even before the nominee was named that they would vote against anyone that this president nominated. 15 more, by my count, have now come out and said that they will oppose the nominee before even meeting with the nominee or reviewing the documents that have already been produced. I can understand the disappointment of our Democratic colleagues. They were hoping that Hillary Clinton would fill this vacancy on the Supreme Court and that she would appoint somebody very different from Brett Kavanaugh. I think what they hoped for is that she would appoint somebody who would advance their political or policy or ideological agenda, wearing a black robe, but acting as essentially a legislator. Ironically, somebody unaccountable to the voters like we are. Judge Kavanaugh is something very different, and I congratulate President Trump for this outstanding nomination to the Supreme Court, just like Neil Gorsuch in many respects. That is a judge who respects their important role in our government, but understanding it is a limited role, and that is not to make policy, not to exploit the lifetime tenure that they have and the lack of political accountability to advance a political or ideological agenda, but one who will interpret the law, including the Constitution, as written. That is the reason why I believe many voters in 2016 voted for President Trump and voted against Hillary Clinton, because they wanted somebody exactly like Brett Kavanaugh on the United States Supreme Court.
So in summary, before we open it up for questions, I don't think that this process is about discovery, it's about delay. We're obviously producing documents. They'll have the tools to search them. They'll have the time to do it. They have thousands of documents they should be reviewing today. I just again want to thank Senator Grassley for being a great chair and being fair and respectful to the minority and producing these approaching 1 million documents. And with that, we'll be happy to answer your questions.
During his confirmation proceedings in 2006, Judge Kavanaugh acknowledged having a role in signing statements as staff secretary, including the role of the torture and interrogation tactics, the Kane Amendment that was passed. He acknowledged having a role in signing statements about that. Are you not interested in learning about his role in those matters?
Yeah. I think that you're probably, your question kind of refers to what the Democrats say is the Kagan standard. You want to remember that Republicans and Democrats, or at least Republicans, wanted to get the Solicitor General documentations that she had at that particular time, and they were not, our request was not responded to because of the sensitivity of them. And all I can say in return to your answer is when it comes to the White House Chief of Staff position that Kavanaugh held, that probably when you consider all the massive communication and paper that the president has between him and his cabinet people, that you'll probably could easily judge that the Chief of Staff papers are probably more sensitive than anything that was in the Solicitor General paper. So based upon that premise and that's procedure, we feel that that asking for them is not anything but a point of delaying the confirmation of Kavanaugh. You may want to add something to that.
Yeah, I think, well, when he was staff secretary, I think there are a lot of parallels. There's sensitivity. It's one of the reasons why then Senator Sessions didn't even request the Solicitor General's documents. And I think for the same reasons, the rationale applies to these.
Don't you want to learn about his role specifically in signing statements?
I want to learn about what he has done in the 307 opinions and in his writings. about his jurisprudence and whether or not he's qualified to be in the role of Supreme Court.
It's my understanding, moreover, that those are talking points, not the development of policy. And there is a very significant distinction between the two of those. Serving as the president's inbox and outbox is very different than being involved in something as a policy matter.
Chairman Grassley. Two points. One, all the negotiations broke down, is there any way to work out a smaller batch of documents from the staff secretary's that would
Yeah.
fill the difference? And also,
Yeah.
just talk to us about the
Yeah.
schedule. Are you confident?
I think there was a wonderful opportunity 3 weeks ago, maybe even the week after he was nominated. We had several conversations, and it looked to us like when they asked for every email in those 6 years that included even mention of the Kavanaugh name, and you're talking about 24 divisions of the White House where those emails could have encompassed of how unreasonable it was. Just the mention of Kavanaugh. Just think of what that would have included beyond what we've already talked about that we know. So consequently, we talked for 2 or 3 weeks and negotiate, and they didn't even want to sign a letter where we all agreed what ought to come, even if there was some disagreement of what didn't come. So if they don't want to cooperate on what we agree on, I had to go ahead.
Yeah, if you think about that, this is just another example of where I don't believe the Democrats are negotiating in good faith. Chair Grassley sat down and said there's a universe of documents, some 7 to 10 million, that may have passed through the Secretary's office. There's a much smaller universe of where the documents were actually created by Mr. Kavanaugh. And he was in a discussion to say we could possibly come to terms to provide you access with things where you could reasonably expect that he authored the documents, come up with search terms that we mutually agreed to, and they didn't want to do it. So if that's not another example of we've already made the decision, that's no. We're going to do everything we can to delay the vote. They were not negotiating in good faith, and I appreciate Chair Grassley trying to get there.
Schedule.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll have 2 more questions.
Yeah, I think who asked about the schedule? I think I have to give you the same answer I gave you the last 2 weeks, sometime during September, because we've got to make sure the flow of the documents that I think are now starting from the George W. Bush Presidential Library. I think very shortly some of those will be up here. We've already got enough documents for people to get into right now, but we obviously got to give time to go through what comes from the Presidential Library. So maybe in a week I can answer your question, but right now I just want to say sometime during the month of September.
You and then you, and then we're done.
One of the main attacks on Kavanaugh from Democrats is his writings on the ability of prosecutors to get at the president. Do you think that it's making life more difficult for Republican senators trying to confirm Kavanaugh with the president tweeting saying that Jeff Sessions should shut down the investigation?
No.
Repeated
Well, I think your questions, I'll answer your question, but I think it's very much unrelated to this. And I'm not going to respond to what the president tweets because I don't get a chance to read all those tweets. So I'm going to tell you what my position is. And it's been this way for a long, long time. I think Mueller ought to proceed and get it over with, and he should have got it over with yesterday. But if he can't get it over yesterday, maybe Friday tomorrow, it can be over because it's been going on for 15 months.
I think the only thing, I think that the press or the media has conflated 2 different issues. What you're talking about is what Brett Kavanaugh wrote about in relation to the Starr investigation. And a lot of people are trying to say that they're trying to modernize it or advance it to 2018. And I think if you take a look at the facts, he did a good job. I discussed that with him when he was in my office. And I don't see how the 2 can be that intertwined as they have been in the press the last 24 hours. One more question, SMK. Well, you're saying, is it fair to deal with these sensitive documents in the same way that we did now Justice Kagan's documents? Is that the question? These were, right. Well, keep in mind two things going here. In spite of the fact that the Republicans never requested the sensitive documents when Kagan was Solicitor General, Chair Grassley got into a negotiation to say that perhaps we will give you some insight into it. The Democrats, demonstrating that they're not negotiating in good faith, didn't take us up on that offer. So I would ask the Democrats, or perhaps you should pose that question to Senator Schumer, don't you think it would have been appropriate to come to terms so that we could have gotten insight into potentially some of those sensitive documents that maybe the American people would like insight into? That's a decision Chuck Schumer made, and the Democratic members of the committee. It's not a decision Republicans made. Thank you all.